What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. We're here going over my core plays for week 20 of the NFL season on DraftKings and FanDuel Playoff Edition Part 2. 4 great games this weekend. Lots of good quarterbacks, lots of good offenses. I know we had some blowouts in the wild card weekend, so hopefully these games are a bit closer, but the matchups do look pretty good. And as always, if you enjoy, make sure you have a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, and let's dive right into it. And as always, if you like what you see on the screen behind me, it's always available completely free for a week over my Patreon for new users. Access to the projections that I use, the ownership, cheat sheets, going over cash games, tournaments, my Discord, optimizer, all that fun stuff. You can find that link down below in the description. And we have NASCAR coming very soon in 2 weeks for the clash before the Super Bowl, so lots of fun times ahead. But let's get into it here. We have a 4-game slate, 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. If you are playing the Saturday only or Sunday only slates, I'm going to be covering the 4-game main slate here, but I'm sure a lot of that can apply to both those slates if you are happening to go that route. But let's get into it here. We'll start with the quarterbacks. I have almost all of them here besides 2. I think CD Stroud and Jordan Love, which no disrespect to them, I just like the other options a little bit better this weekend. So let's try to keep this game by game if possible, just to make it more simple. So we'll start with the Bills in the Chiefs game. We know this one's always a bit of a banger. It seems like we get it almost every single playoffs, although I think we only have 2, so maybe just the past couple of years. But we have round 3 here. Josh Allen is 0-2 versus Mahomes, but all these games have been in Arrowhead. Now they're at home in Orchard Park, so it could be a bit of a different story this time around. 2.5 point spread in the Bills' favor, 45.5 point over under, 24 point implied team total for the Bills, 21.5 for the Kansas City Chiefs. I am fine with both quarterbacks in tournaments. I probably prefer Mahomes because he's $1,200 cheaper and has pretty similar upside to Josh Allen. Now, I will say the ceiling these days is probably a lot higher with Allen because of that rushing upside. Patrick Mahomes does run the ball a bit, but he doesn't really get those rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen will. And the nice 52-yard scamper versus the Pittsburgh Steelers last week on his way to a big game versus that Steelers defense. So the stacking options are pretty clear. I mean, with Allen, you're looking at Stephon Diggs, even though he's not been his normal self at the second half of this season. You also have other cheap options with no Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakur, Trent Sherfield, I believe, who got that tip touchdown in the last week of the season versus the Miami Dolphins. You also have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. So it's really kind of easy to stack that up, even though he is a bit expensive. And with Mahomes, you pretty much only have 2 options. It's going to be Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice, but that's where the ball goes in that offense, so I don't mind that for tournaments. And then a game I really like this week is going to be the Detroit Lions versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home at Ford Field in the Dome for the Detroit Lions, where they typically play their best football. 48.5 point over under in this one, 27.5 implied team total for the Lions, 21 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road, 6.5 point spread in Detroit's favor. I think Jared Goff will end up being one of the more popular quarterbacks on this slate because of the price point. He's obviously very easy to stack with. Amon-Ra St. Brown, definitely a little pricey on this slate, but it's still pretty soft pricing overall. I feel like most people more than likely try to jam in St. Brown and CMC, and it's really not that hard to do. So for Jared Goff, outside of St. Brown, the stacking options are really cheap. You have Josh Reynolds, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, if you're really trusting him coming off the injury. I know he caught a touchdown, but outside of that, didn't really do too much in that offense, but he's still averaging 270 passing yards and over 1.5 passing touchdowns per game on the season. This Tampa Bay defense is brutal versus the pass, 27 versus the quarterback. And on the flip side, Baker Mayfield, I think, is a fine pivot off of Jared Goff, who should come in at lower ownership at $6,000, just off a big game versus the Philadelphia Eagles, where he had 3 touchdowns. And that was with Mike Evans having a pretty quiet game. He did drop a couple of passes. I think he dropped like a 40-yard touchdown early on in the game, but David Moore got into the end zone. Cade Otton had a big game. You also saw Trey Palmer. And then Chris Godwin kind of caught a prayer throw at the end of the game for a touchdown. But all worked out for Baker Mayfield and company. And the Lions are actually worse versus the pass than the Buccaneers are versus quarterbacks this year. They're allowing the 3rd most points per game at 21.9, 270 passing yards at 1.6 passing touchdowns. So Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, definitely guys I'm going to try to get exposure to this weekend. And then the 2 guys we didn't talk about, Lamar Jackson and Brock Purdy. We'll start with Lamar, obviously 2 very different types of quarterbacks. He gets a pretty good matchup versus the Houston Texans. Versus the pass this year, obviously not been very good. 24th versus quarterbacks, 250 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown. Actually, kind of an interesting stat. Nearly half a rushing touchdown per game allowed as well defensively, which obviously can be very skewed depending on who you are playing. But they did play the AFC North this year. But Lamar here at $7,900, he's going to run the football, averaging over 50 rushing yards per game. So it's always going to give him a dual threat, which is always great for fantasy purposes. 26.5 implied team total for the Baltimore Ravens at home, 9.5 point spread. I don't really see any reason not to like Lamar here. And if you're going to stack with them, Zay Flowers is an option. And then outside of that, Mark Andrews, He's currently questionable. It sounds like he's trending towards not playing. They said his availability is uncertain, so I'm going to assume he's going to be out, even though he did practice fully. It looks like it'll be Isaiah Likely, so those are the two options that I would most likely stack with. And then Brock Purdy. Just the 49ers continue to be too cheap. George Kittle's in the 5K range. The wide receiver's not that expensive. And this is the pretty much best offense in football, 50.5 point over-under in this game. They're playing at home, 30-point implied team total, which is the highest of the week. And for a guy that averages 270 yards and 2 passing touchdowns per game, 9.6 yards per attempt, he's got Kyle Shanahan keeping guys wide open. He has pretty much the best running back in football out there. He's a big threat in the passing game. CMC, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. Hard to stop this offense, so I am certainly fine with playing Brock Purdy this week. I would say him and Jared Goff are probably the two favorite quarterbacks for me to get to. Then Baker Mayfield, because they're so cheap and it allows me to fit in all the studs in this slate. All right, so heading over to our build here, like I said, lots of good quarterbacks we can pick from this week. I like Purdy, Goff, and Baker Mayfield at the price points and just the overall game environments. But we're going to roll Jared Goff here at $6,300. Love the stacking options with him. St. Brown and probably Josh Reynolds. Maybe I'll just throw in Jameson Williams. But either way, I like the direction that goes. And then we can get a run back option from the Tampa Buccaneers. And I think that'll be a very good game stack on this slate. Moving on to the running backs, there's obviously one guy that stands above the rest of the field. He projects so much better than everybody else, and the best play on the slate. It's Christian McCaffrey. He's $8,800 on DraftKings, which is way too cheap on FanDuel. They actually make it a bit of a question at $10,800, but I would still try to find a way to get there. But I mean, on DraftKings, he's way. You're gonna have to plug him in. 30-point implied team total at home, 9.5-point favorite. And the Packers' run D is worse than their pass D. They're 20th versus running backs, allowing 100 rushing yards per game and close to a rushing touchdown, 22.6 points per game as well. In the volume, 22 opportunities per game for Christian McCaffrey, 18% target share, nearly 5 targets, and he's going to get you around 18 carries, 17 carries on the ground per game this year. So you're pretty much locked in for 100 plus yards. You're basically locked in for a touchdown. You get work through the air. No reason not to like CMC on the best offense in the league. Aaron Jones, a big game versus Dallas, 3 touchdowns, over 100 total yards. Tougher matchup versus the 49ers, though, and I'm not expecting the game script to go quite as well as it did last week versus Dallas. They're 9.5-point dogs on the road, 20.5 implied team total here. And the 49ers are allowing the 4th fewest points per game, only 60 rushing yards, but they are giving up some passes, which we know Aaron Jones is a capable pass catcher in the passing game, over 5 receptions and 40 receiving yards for the 49ers defense, 2 running backs this season. So I think he is fine in tournaments. I don't think I'll go there in cash games. I don't think he can rule it out because after CMC, I mean, basically all these guys are the same. Jahmyr Gibbs, Rachaad White, Pacheco, James Cook. As far as projections are concerned, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the best running back talent-wise after these guys, but just projection-wise, they're not going to be too much different because Jahmyr Gibbs, if he was getting the full-on workload, 20-plus touches, I mean, yeah, he's going to be projecting the best. But unfortunately, David Montgomery is always going to be a threat. He's going to get goal line work, so it's not always going to be sunshines and rainbows there for Jahmyr Gibbs. But dude's electric, over 5 yards per carry. He's also getting 5 targets per game and pretty much double-digit rushing attempts. So if we can get 15 opportunities out of Jahmyr Gibbs, I will take it. I wouldn't say Tampa Bay is my most favorite matchup in the world. They are 3rd fewest points per game allowed to the running back position this season, but 80 rushing yards is not much through the air. But Jahmyr Gibbs in the Lions offense, we know they can cook at home. 27.5 implied team total here for the Lions, so I'm fine with Gibbs, whether it be cash games or tournaments. Rachaad White, I prefer the passing game on both sides in this game, but we know Rashad's pretty much locked in for 20 total opportunities. It wasn't a great game versus the Philadelphia Eagles, but like I said, they're a bit of a pass funnel defense, and that's kind of what Detroit is as well, because if you're looking at how they've been versus the run this year, they're allowing the fewest points per game at 60 rushing yards and only 3.5 catches. So not my favorite matchup, but I just had to have him on here because he gets plenty of volume, and if he falls into the end zone, he's going to be viable on such a small slate. Isaiah Pacheco, a guy I do like quite a bit, 21.5 implied team total for the Kansas City Chiefs, 2.5-point dogs on the road in Buffalo. You're pretty much locked in for at least 15 touches out of Pacheco, but he can inch towards 20, depending on how much usage he gets in the passing game. Jared McKinnon still in the IR, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire just obviously too much of a threat to Pacheco here, so he's going to get the lion's share of the workload. Those are 17th versus running backs. Also allowing 5 catches and 41 receiving yards per game to the position as well, but Pacheco's a dog, and they're going to lean on him as much as they can. And on the upside of this game, you have James Cook here at $6,300. A couple other running backs in this backfield that do get opportunities. Leonard Fournette's not going to be in the question anymore. But you also have Ty Johnson, who has seen some usage in recent weeks. But Cook is obviously going to be the preferred option here. Moving back over to our build here, like I said, you pretty much need to play CMC on the slate. Like, sure, you can fade him, and if he doesn't get to the end zone, you might be all right. But even if he doesn't get to the end zone, there's still a chance he can get you 20-plus points pretty easily. So I'm just going to play him here because I'm going with the Lions Tampa Bay stack. So I'm probably not going to be able to get any of the pass catches for the Niners. And if they have a 30-point total, I need exposure to that offense somehow. So I would take CMC there. Then after that, RB2 is a bit of a guessing game. I don't really like anybody below some of those 6K guys we talked about because they're all pretty much backups. Maybe Dave Montgomery at that price point, but I don't think that makes too much sense with Jared Goff since we have the passing game. So for me, it's just one of these middle-of-the-road 6K backs. Gibbs would be fine with Jared Goff because he's a pass threat, obviously, but I think I'm going to go with Isaiah Pacheco. I want some exposure to that Chiefs and Bills game. And like I said, since I'm going with the Lions stack, I'm probably not going to be able to get to the passing game of most other offenses. So I think getting Isaiah Pacheco there makes some sense. And as I always say with wide receivers, so many options every single week. So just correlate it the best you possibly can with your quarterbacks, especially on a small slate like this. Like if I'm playing Jared Goff, sure, I might love Deebo Samuel. I might love Nico Collins. But I have to start with Amon-Ra St. Brown no matter what. Like, I can't pick those other guys first and be like, well, I can't fit St. Brown in with them. I have to start with St. Brown. We'll see who fits with him. And then run back options there. We could look at a Mike Evans, a Chris Godwin. If you're looking for cheaper stacking options with Jared Goff, Josh Reynolds, Jameson Williams, I think are way too cheap this week. And they will be very popular because of that. But they do make the game stacks fit quite nicely. You're using Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. You're looking at those guys. Run it back with one of those Green Bay wide receivers who seem to be unlimited at this point. There's so many of them, it seems like. You have the tight ends, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. You have Jaden Reed, Wicks, Dobbs, Christian Watson. You also have guys like Bo Melton back there, Malik Heath. I mean, the list just goes on over in Packerland. They have so many options to get the ball to. You can even use Aaron Jones if you want, since he should be involved in the passing game as well. But just try to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, if you have Patrick Mahomes, use one of his pass catchers or two, run it back with some of the Bills guys. So yes, there's always a long list, but you can make things way more simple if you just kind of follow those guidelines, especially on a small slot like this where we need some heavily correlated lineup. All right, so back to our build here. We got to get a couple pass catchers with Mr. Jared Goff here. Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be the obvious choice. Should eat up that Tampa Bay secondary. And I believe they played earlier in the season, and I want to say Amon-Ra St. Brown absolutely ate them up. Yeah, week 6, 15 targets, 12 catches, 120 yards, got into the end zone. 33.4 points, which I believe is his second best game of the entire year. So yeah, I don't really have any doubts with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Then I'm going to have to grab one of the cheap guys here. So either Jameson Williams or Josh Reynolds. You pick your choice there. I'm going to go with Reynolds. I feel like he's a bit safer. Obviously, Williams has that home run upside, but I'm just going to roll with Reynolds here. And then we either need to go Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Yes, I know Trey Palmer, David Moore. I mean, if you're playing 20 max builds or 150, sure, you can filter those guys in, but I'm not going to do it on a single entry. I would like to be able to afford Mike Evans. I'm not sure if it's going to be possible. If I do plug him in, we're only at $3,000 left for the remaining couple of spots, which we do have a cheap tight end, cheap defense we can use, but I'm just not quite sure it's going to be able to work. So we're probably going to have to save some money here with Chris Godwin at $6,300. Although that's still not a great number at $3,500. It's definitely way more doable, I think. Tight end's always going to be a similar concept. I would try to correlate it the best you possibly can. Now, I'm not in love with Sam Laporta this week. Like, I think he can get into the end zone, but I do like other tight ends here. So Travis Kelce would be someone I'm trying to build around, especially in cash games. By Brock Purdy, George Kittle's probably way too cheap here at $5,200. We know he has the upside of 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Certainly possible. Dalton Kincaid, even Dawson Knox, both are viable. Isaiah likely looks like he's going to be the tight end 1 here in Baltimore, at least for this week. We'll have to monitor the injury status on Mark Andrews, but it sounds like he's trending towards not playing. Dalton Schultz, if you happen to go CJ Stroud or if you need a run back option in Baltimore stacks, he is fine. And then Cade Otton, I actually like him, and I think he's actually a good candidate to be in the lineup that we're building right now, because we can double stack and double run back. I mean, that's certainly viable. And we know Cade Otton was very busy in that game versus Philly, and I wouldn't be surprised if he can get his 5+ targets again. And as for defenses, I don't care who you play, just play a random defense. It doesn't really matter on this slate. I think the Bills and Chiefs is not a bad game for defenses. And it sounds weird to say because we know Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, typically not guys you want defense against, but we know Josh Allen can turn the ball over. Maybe you get a defensive touchdown from KC because their defense has been pretty solid this year. So I don't want the Chiefs at all at $2,700. And if I'm playing Pacheco, I'm hoping the game stays close. So it's not a terrible correlation play. But there are my top 2 defenses projection-wise. Not raw points, but point per dollar. And if you have the money for the Ravens, they're going to be the top one. But for me, it's probably going to be Bills and Chiefs for the most part. All right, so let's finish this lineup off. I'm going to plug Cade Otton here, the tight end position, just because he's cheap and he makes sense with the build that we're going with. I will throw in the Chiefs defense to correlate with Isaiah Pacheco and just hope Josh Allen gives us our 2 turnovers or whatever it may be. And now we have $100 for the flex spot. Now, tight ends, good look at Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, Dawson Knox. Those guys are all viable. But I think most likely we'd end up with a wide receiver. And our options aren't too bad. We have Khalil Shakur, who I don't mind at all. I love Nelson Aguilar. Jameson Williams, if you want a triple stack with Jared Goff, I am fine with that on a small slate like this. But I would say our two best options are probably Shakir and Jameson Williams. So I don't think that's a bad looking build. We have Jared Goff stacked with Allen St. Brown, Josh Reynolds potentially, J-Mo as well, Christian McCaffrey, and Isaiah Pacheco at running back. We also have the Chiefs defense to pair with Pacheco there. And then Godwin and Auden as a run back options. So don't copy and paste this, but roster construction wise, I do think it looks pretty good. And if I was using a different quarterback, it would be the same type of roster construction, just a different type of player. So it's just plug and play depending on the quarterback you pick. And as always, just run the optimizer here, see who's populating the most as of right now. This is recorded on Friday, so I'm not really sure too much will change by the time Saturday rolls around, but obviously some of these projections certainly can, especially if the ownership likely. Let's pull the builds here and see who is popping. Very slight randomness added on and some stacking settings. That's really just about it. If you were actually building 150, I'd probably spend a little bit more time on it, but just wanted to get some raw numbers here. So pulling at the players that pop the most. No surprise here, CMC up top. Josh Reynolds, a guy that I expect to be very popular on this slate. I like him a lot. I think he's way too cheap. Great matchup versus Tampa Bay. I feel like a lot of people will go there for salary savings. Bills defense popping up a ton. Amon St. Brown, Travis Kelce. If you're playing cash games, I probably would start with CMC, St. Brown, and Kelce, and Reynolds more than likely be the first salary saver that I plug in there, so not really too surprised. Jameson Williams. And then Jared Goff's my highest QB, which when you have all of his wide receivers popping up as pretty much the three highest, no surprise that Jared Goff is going to being up there. Well, Christian Watson, a little bit surprised about that. I'm assuming he's getting jammed in as a run back option, but he's also only $4,200. So it's a little bit cheaper than where I think he should be. I realize Romeo Doubs stole the show versus the Dallas Cowboys, but I mean, that's a pretty fair price point, I think, for a guy that's definitely got some big play upside. His quarterback hasn't played good football. Likely's up there pretty high. Probably is the stacking option with Lamar, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kate Otten. So pretty much all guys we'd expect. Detroit, my highest team. Like they're just projecting very well for the matchup they're in, and they're just so good at home. I think there's a decent chance we see them in the NFC Championship game, which will be sweet to see. 49ers, Buffalo, KC, and the teams that are lowest, Green Bay and Houston, which does end up making sense to me. Probably no surprises there, and hopefully this gave you guys a decent idea on who's going to be popular this weekend. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys this week, so hope you did enjoy, and if you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all